Hey there, everybody. It's me, Chris Herman, here for another episode of On Deck. Today's topic is technology, and this is going to probably in the sequence of how this podcast rolls out, this will be the episode that follows the creativity episode that I technically just recorded just a minute or two ago. So yes, I still have congestion. Excuse me. Pardon me. But I do not have COVID. I just have a cold that has been nagging at me the last few days. So I wanted to talk about technology, but particularly technology as it pertains to creativity. We live and are living in really an amazing time to be a creative person, not only from the advent of technology and what's available to everybody pretty much at this point in time to be able to create, but also from the perspective of how creativity can now be distributed. And so in the previous episode, I talked a lot about creativity, what my foundational childhood things were that I did to, that developed my creative ability and what led me in this direction. But I ended talking about how we're really in this amazing time for creatives, and it's only going to get more powerful. And I'm not talking about, the advent of the computer and improved cameras and the iPhone. All of that stuff is amazing. I mean, think about the progressions that graphic designers have been able to make over the years as the software has gotten better. Think about the progression of video editors and what they've been able to do over the years as those design platforms have gotten better. Camera gear continuing to get better to the point where if you look at Apple's new advertising for their most recent iPhone, they're highlighting the fact that you can basically make a cinema quality movie on your phone right now. Whether that's true or not, Greg, you'd be able to give me more insight on that. But the point is that the technology has advanced to give us the tools, give creatives the tools that they need. And social media has given us the ability to connect with each other and create audiences so that creative people can immediately distribute their work and get it out to the public quickly without having to go through some sort of intermediary, which I think that's really where I'm leading with this topic on technology, is how technology is going to continue to make the world for creative people much better. So think about this. Go back in history for those of you that have, traveled or been to Europe. Certainly, you've been in any number of I don't want to assume that you have, but for those of you that have traveled to Europe, you've been in some cathedral somewhere and you look and it's a work of art, right? And you have beautiful paintings on the ceiling and stained glass in the windows, and all that stuff was done by somebody, right? So you think about the old painters, or of course, I think the first one that comes to mind would be like Michelangelo, and first off, following a creative path is not necessarily a path to riches. I think anybody, who grew up, at the same time and I did, if you expressed to your parents that you wanted to be a musician or an artist or a poet or a writer, there was usually sort of that same response, like, oh my God, you're going to end up broke. You're going to end up on drugs, whatever it was. But it was not something that was particularly encouraged because, for years and years and years, painters, musicians, actors, writers, they didn't necessarily make a lot of money. It's a labor of love to commit yourself to a life of creating, knowing that there may not be any financial reward for you. And if you look back to the old master painters, old painters, they were often commissioned, right? So the Pope or a religious leader or a king or a queen or a noble person would commission an artist to do a piece. I don't know how that exactly worked out from the perspective of how they got paid. I mean, I guess, they were happy to be commissioned to do the work, right? And they did get paid for it. Did they get paid the full value of their work? Probably not. And in most cases, I think we've all heard the story about how most famous artists, their artwork doesn't really start generating any real revenue until long after they've passed. and have had the opportunity for their work to gain popularity, and then it starts trading and exchanging at high dollar rates. And so, if you think about the old artists, the starving artist, it's not a cliche, it's a real deal because they didn't make any money. And so you hear a lot of these stories about painters, their work not being worth anything until long after they are gone. Okay, not the case anymore. Musicians. Again, musicians way back in history often commissioned by powerful people. Mozart, Johann Sebastian Bach, they didn't just write these symphonies necessarily for nobody. They were commissioned to do them, and yes, they were paid. But again, were they paid what they were really worth for those masterpiece works? No. And so in the early ages, it's like the musicians had to be commissioned, by kingdoms and principalities and the Pope and whoever. And then when you move into sort of what we'll call the more modern recording era, and I remember this growing up as a kid and, thinking, it'd be great to be in a band and make an album. And, you hear, these stories, so-and-so, they got signed, and, these bands that got rich and famous after they were signed to a record deal. And so, if you go back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, when recording really started to kick in, it was, and probably still is to some degree, a pretty scuzzy business because you had opportunistic business people looking at these artists and seeing that they had an incredible way to make money with these artists. Those deals were extremely one-sided, not in the favor of the artist. Artists and musicians would get some sort of signing it bonus and or advance to go into the studio to record an album, and if the album succeeded, they got royalties, and if they didn't, they were dropped by the label. But you couldn't, as a musician in the 50s or 60s or really or 70s or 80s, even kind of into the 90s, less so in the 80s and 90s because you had a lot of independent record labels start popping up. But as a musician or a band, you weren't getting out there. You weren't being heard on the radio. You weren't recording an album if you didn't get some sort of record deal. So you were beholden to these gigantic business organizations, and without that, you really didn't have access to the audience. Think about the traditional concept of an actor, going to Hollywood to make it big, or going to Broadway to make it big on the stage. There's sort of this process of which acting and performance talent had to go through that also required this like vetting process before they were even maybe considered for a role, which then only if they got that role were they able to be introduced to the public as a particular talent, right? So whether it's, the artists of the old time, musicians up until only within a couple decades ago, actors even up until now to some degree, there was always this, as a creative person, sort of, you had to subjugate yourself to somebody else to get your work exposed and to get paid, right? And in most cases, most of those transactions, those business transactions regarding the artist's work and performance and compensation, in most cases, they were extremely one-sided, not in favor of the artist. Because, how many just kids or actors or actresses or, musicians, or guitar players, painters, if you've chosen that life, you're not particularly well-versed in contract law and negotiating for royalties and rights to the ownership of your catalog, et cetera, et cetera. So didn't work out real well. Then the internet comes along and Napster comes along, and, all of a sudden music is made available for free to a lot of people, and people are downloading music off of the internet. And I might not be sequentially right here, and I'm not going to touch on how every piece of technology affected every bit of this topic, but it changed the game from the perspective of music became something that could be sort of directly downloaded by the customer. Now, I, as somebody who plays guitar and was in a band, never of any consequence or substance really, but substance. We had a little substance, but it's not like we made a ton of money and what have you. But I was always against. I don't think music should be free. I don't think art should be free. And I don't think people should be able to get it for free or steal it. But I also think that the old way of there being some gigantic corporate entity in between the artist and the audience, I don't think that's the right way either. So where am I leading with all of this? Blah, 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 blah. Well, the point that I'm trying to say is this all leads to why right now is such an amazing time for artists and creative people. We touched on with the technology, touched on why for years it was difficult for artists to reach the audience, but now not only can artists directly reach their audience, create and cultivate an audience and grow an audience, but they can now monetize. And so I'm particularly speaking, I guess, about social media, but more about this new landscape of NFTs, non-fungible tokens. The ability for artists to put their work, for their work to be minted onto the blockchain, and clearly I signed sole ownership over that piece of work, and then to be able to sell that piece of work, and then to also be able to collect a royalty every time that that piece of work transacts from now until forever. It's like a dream come true for creative people. No longer do you need a record label. No longer do you need like an art manager or, whoever that would be. No longer do you necessarily even need a talent manager. I mean, shit, if you're an actor or an actress, go on TikTok. Spend a couple weeks on TikTok and tell me you are not seeing some of the best creative individuals. I mean, you're seeing a lot of craziness, but you're also seeing like some legitimately talented people who didn't need to go to Hollywood and go on 10,000 auditions. They just started creating something themselves. They built an audience, and now they've got, millions of followers based on their talent and their creativity. Does that mean that will translate to a movie deal? I don't know, but it doesn't. Maybe that's not the goal. I mean, if you're able to cash flow significantly positive off your TikTok stream and off your YouTube channel, may not be a real need to get on a sitcom, because you already have access to the audience yourself on TikTok or Instagram. Musicians, painters, creative people, to create and upload and put your stuff on OpenSea, create an OpenSea account and sell your stuff as NFTs for Ethereum. I mean, if you look at OpenSea.co, I think it's .co.io, whatever then, it's OpenSea, OPENSEA. I spoke about it in a previous episode. If you look at the work on there and look at what it's transacting for, that's why you have to really let this sink in. As a creative person, you can create an audience on social. You can let that audience know on social that you are about to put your work, you're about to do an NFT drop on OpenSea. Maybe it's 12 assets, maybe it's 100 assets, right? But then you can put that work out there and let the marketplace determine whether it's got value or not directly. You don't need any middleman. You just put it out there and you can sell it. And in some cases, work is selling for an enormous amount of money. But what is, as I mentioned earlier, even more impressive is the fact that, not only can you sell it, music, video, graphic design work, but you can also assign a royalty to your work. So you can say, okay, the price of this piece of graphic design, this art, that you could put on a gigantic video screen in your house and it would be so beautiful, it's 10 Ether. Okay, that's $40,000. But in addition to it being 10 Ether, I'm also placing a 10% royalty built in to this piece of art. So if somebody buys it for 40,000 or 10 Ether, right? And 3 years down the road, they're able to sell that for 10 Ether or $100,000. Well, guess what? That artist just picked up another 10% of that transaction, and that will go on for eternity. So not only do they make the hit the one time, which they deserve to do, but every time that piece continues to sell, they are able to retain a royalty on that. Okay, this is a game changer for creative people. It's absolutely a game changer, and life will never be the same. And you're going to start to see a lot more very successful creative people. I mean, we've already seen it through social media, because listen, you got to be pretty damn creative to build up a following on social media that has got millions of people, right? You've got to be creative. Okay, people aren't following that stuff just based on personality. It's personality, it's creativity, it's expression. That's what's generating the audience, right? So you take that, and then the ability to create and transact and benefit from that financially, not needing a company, not needing a sponsorship, not needing any of that, but to be able to take that directly to the public. It's unbelievable, and it's going to change the world. It is absolutely going to change the world. I've said this in previous episodes. If you are not spending time dialing in on what is blockchain, what is Ethereum, what are smart contracts, what are NFTs, what is cryptocurrency, how does cryptocurrency position against fiat currency? If you're not spending time learning about this right now, you're not left behind yet. But if you wake up in 5 years and you haven't spent any time on it, you're going to be way, way, way behind. So creative people, technology is making the world a beautiful place for all of us because we can control our work, what we sell it for, how we transact, the royalties we get. You can publish it, put it out there. It's freaking fantastic. So previous episode, I talked about creativity. This one is about technology. Really, I look at these as bookend podcasts, sharing my thoughts on these two topics, which really, at this stage of the game, go hand in hand. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Spend some time digging in on this stuff if you want to know where the world is headed in regards to technology. And it's not all metaverse, and it's not all doomsday, Matrix kind of stuff. It is a little bit, but nevertheless, it'll be what you make of it. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Technology for artists and creativity. It's there's never been a better time. Thanks so much. It's been another episode here with me, Chris Herman, on deck. As always, please subscribe to the Herman Agency. If I could say it right, that would be good. The Herman Agency YouTube channel. Like and comment on this video, and please ring the bell so that you can get alerts when new video content comes out. Hope you're all having a good one. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll see you.